Welcome to the Elixir podcast, where we ask people from all walks of life and from around the world what their favourite poem is and why it's important to them, why or how it speaks to their heart. If you have a poem that you would like to share and would like to appear on the podcast, please contact me at helenwing@me.com. Hello and welcome to another Elixir Poetry podcast. Today we're talking to Albina Kovalyova, who lives in London and is of Russian Ukrainian descent and is a documentary filmmaker. Hello, Albina.
Hello, Helen.
Now, I gather actually today you're going to be reading two of your own poems. So which poem would you like to read first?
I'd like to read a poem I wrote recently called In Dark Waters, and I wrote it last summer.
Okay.
In dark waters. In dark waters, the waves come crashing through this young love just born into the dark sea at storm. I roam through the world coming through the news as the narratives get tangled and confused. Trying to pull them apart, I lose your hand held tight. The calamities of words stream through and conjure up the images and ghosts of old times and more horror yet to come. They say 1,000,000 is already gone from the destruction of the last few years. As the memory of your scent and touch fade, I grab hold of the air filled with pocket holes. I cannot hear the music from before, just the drumbeats of war. The dream becomes darker. Shall we continue the dance in the shadow of the next big wave, unknowing whether we can be engulfed to the point of no return? There are no lifeboats here. A black sail appears on the horizon. And then your eyes find mine. There's a glimpse of hope, of strength, and of abandon. Here is my hand, lost and found again.
Oh wow, Albina, that is so beautiful and so dark. Tell me what drove you to write that poem?
Well, in the background of the news and the wars that have basically overshadowed my life in the last few years, it's that kind of reaching for hope and love of someone you know, but also knowing that it's dark times and that love is so fragile. And so it's a love poem, but it's also a love poem in a time of war, in a time of calamity.
Yeah, and in a time where history takes over our lives rather than us being able to direct our lives. I think it's very poignant and really a really important idea for our times.
Thank you very much.
You've come to poetry quite recently, I gather. You're a filmmaker and an animator, is that right?
No, I'm not an animator. My dad is an animator, but poetry is definitely something I've been writing and reading since I was really young, actually. I first came to poetry when I was about 15, and I do have a very sort of filmic background and a sensibility, and so poetry for me is kind of the rhythm that goes with film. But in fact, rhythm and music is the feeling I have for all art forms. I feel like it's the kind of the beat that drives everything. And so the poetry, just in written word, is very close to the poetry of, film, which works in that level, but in a visual and a musical and a meaningful way, and juxtaposition of images and forms in a much more complex way. And for me, poetry is kind of the distillation of all of it through just one form. But I usually work in many because film is text and moving image and a long story and sound.
Yeah, no, this poem is actually really filmic and very vivid. So you have a very, very vivid picture of what's going on visually as well as emotionally. It's amazing for that. And what about your second poem? What's that called?
The second poem is called A Train to Somewhere. It's also a love poem, and it's also a poem about our times.
Okay.
Train to somewhere. What if you were somebody different? What if the road had been curved to a different location? What if we had traveled it both? If only a moment of transference instead of the spiral to rage. Perhaps then we'd be somewhere different. The place of arrival would change. Our train at the platform has split. One side has 2 blinking lights. The new destination will glimmer, but the other split carriage is dark. The creak of the wheels and the movement of going somewhere yet unknown, and the view from the windows familiar. I think it's the train to call home. I want to look back at the carriage, what's left of the unity that until recently traveled together, but alas is no longer intact. We speed up into the sunshine. The passengers here are all ghosts. They look at their phones or at windows, and I'm left in this space on my own. The pathway is a straight line to somewhere. At some point I ought to get off, and call it arrival, and call it deliverance. Breathe out a sigh and let go.
Well, that's really, truly wonderful. I really, really like this one. And we are all ghosts, aren't we? We're out in public.
Yeah, I think.
But this is a less hopeful. This is actually a less hopeful poem.
This is the end point. Yes, this is when all has been lost. But it's a little bit. It's a little bit of the new beginning after the loss as well. You know, because the train moves on.
Yeah, but I sense a certain irony in the "and call it arrival" and "call it deliverance." Was it not a little bit ironic?
It is indeed a little bit ironic, but it feels to me like not that I've consciously done this, but I think it's a little bit of a Tom Waits feel to it, you know, where it's dark and it's a love song and it's kind of all lost, but it's kind of in the growl. There's something there.
Well, these sort of nuggets of beauty as well, that despite everything else that's going on, that ability to perceive beauty even in the darkest times, you know, and that's present in both of these poems. So when you've been writing for a long time, and who are your great influences? Do you have any iconic writers that you really love?
Yeah, of course. And I think the influence is both from poetry itself and also through the poetry that is in life. And I think, you know, not just in art forms, but, you know, just sometimes the kind of juxtaposition of an image and a moment. But in terms of the artists, I think T.S. Eliot is a big influence, just the musicality of how he writes and the kind of metaphysical aspect. It definitely chimes with me, even though it might not be original. But I think a lot of the poetry that I feel very deeply is in music and in rap music and in, you know, I mentioned Tom Waits. I think his lyrics juxtaposed with his music is fantastic. And, you know, Bob Dylan. I mean, there's so many. It's really hard to say who were the biggest. In film, it's probably people like Jean-Luc Godard, who made, you know, film into poetry with juxtaposing strange kind of sentences with montage and beautiful characters, and it's kind of philosophical. So I think, you know, for me, it's just about finding poetry in it all. And I think what you mentioned about finding the light and the darkness is very much the key to what I do in film and also what I try to do through the writing.
This is also very Tom Waits as well. I guess you know his asylum years, when he just takes people he's coming across in bars and on the street, and, you know, however desperate their situations are, he somehow makes them poignant and beautiful, and somehow less desperate just because he's watching them, you know. It's lovely.
Yes, he's a kind of poet journalist in a way, or poet documentarist as well, because he captures through sound. What you said is very interesting, that he manages to find characters and really kind of give them a voice, but he does it through his own filter, which is the artistry, which is the poetry.
Yeah. Your commitment to musicality, I think, is really important, because it is the rhythm of words that allows us to take them on and hold them and keep them, and it's the one, people find it very hard to define poetry. But I think for me, everything goes back to the fact that poetry is an oral tradition, ultimately, even however scriptural and legible we've become over the centuries. Actually, the poems that stay with us are the ones that have the musicality that allows us to know them really well and keep repeating them, or having an image constantly coming back to your mind. And that comes from the oral tradition of music and verse in music.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Actually, another poet who is very much in that direction is E.E. Cummings. And he's very, I don't know, I think his poems are so open to interpretation, what they actually mean. But the way they're written is just so gloriously rhythmic. It creates such a musicality that's another thing. That's another author that is very close to my heart.
As a filmmaker, do you see a real place for poetry in film? Can you see yourself developing your own filmmaking with the poetry that you're writing, for instance?
It's a very interesting question. I work in the current affairs sort of sector, so there's a lot of boundaries in terms of what you can do creatively, or at least you're always trying to push the boundaries. But I definitely feel that the poetry that I try to evoke in the films that I make are about going very deeply into human character and really bringing out something very raw and very sincere within the process that is quite constrained. And I think that is a kind of probably signature of mine within what I do.
But also the natural, like you said, the natural poetry of people and people's lives. As a documentary maker, I imagine that the most effective documentary work is when you manage to capture the authentic voice of people witnessing their lives. Actually, I've just been reading a book that does that, which is by Belarusian Svetlana Alexievich. I don't know if you know her work. So I've just been reading her Chernobyl Prayer, and she's so unlike Tom Waits. She deliberately eschews having, if you like, the presence of her own voice in her work. She creates these works that are oral history. She interviews people, and she transcribes what they've said in the way that they've said it. And it's just through the way that she puts these accounts together that she builds an incredible picture of a place or a time or a set of experiences. So, I imagine, I guess she's a documentary writer in script, in writing, rather than in film. But it is that such an effective way of accessing, like you say, the poetry of ordinary people's lives, which is partly the point of our podcast, to have as they say, the man on the Clapham omnibus talk about the poetry that they like or the poetry that they write, because I am convinced that everybody has poetry in their lives. They just haven't really worked it out sometimes. And I'm constantly surprised by the people that offer to do podcasts with us. And it's just lovely. So would you like to read these poems again to us? They are absolutely beautiful. And if it's all right with you, could I put a link to them on our podcast page?
I would be delighted.
Okay, wonderful. So would you read the first one again to us, which was In Dark Waters?
Of course.
It reminds me, actually, can I just say, In Dark Waters, it reminds me of films about migrants as well as films about war. That amazing film of those two girls who pulled the boat swimming themselves across the sea to bring the migrants to shore. And also, I wanted to ask you, is the Black Sail a reference to Homer?
Could be.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, I'll now let you read.
In dark waters. In dark waters, the waves come crashing through this young love just born into the dark sea at storm. I roam through the world coming through the news as the narratives get tangled and confused. Trying to pull them apart, I lose your hand held tight. The calamities of words stream through and conjure up the images and ghosts of old times and more horror yet to come. They say 1 million is already gone from the destruction of the last few years. As the memory of your scent and touch fade, I grab hold of the air filled with pocket holes. I cannot hear the music from before, just the drum beats of war. The dream becomes darker. Shall we continue the dance in the shadow of the next big wave, unknowing whether we can be engulfed to the point of no return? There are no lifeboats here. A black sail appears on the horizon. And then your eyes find mine. There's a glimpse of hope, of strength, and of abandon. Here is my hand, lost and found again.
It's very, very, very beautiful, Albina. I really, really like that. So beautiful. I wanted to ask you, you speak several languages, is that right? Do you speak Russian as well as English?
I speak Russian. My Ukrainian is pretty good in terms of understanding, but not speaking, and I understand a bit of Spanish.
Do you write in your other languages ever?
I don't really write in my other languages, although I would like to. I have a little bit of I have a hang up about my Russian because I wasn't raised in a Russian speaking country. And so my Russian was very much became my second language, even though I was born to a Russian speaking family. In fact, I was born in Moscow, but I grew up in the West and English became my first language. And I never got over the kind of snobbery of Russians in particular, who kind of made me feel bad about how bad my grammar was. So I never embraced writing in this language at all. And my grammar is still pretty poorly. So although when I speak, no one notices.
I wanted to tell you about another writer. She's called Zaina Hashem Beck, and she wrote a book called O, which is published by Penguin. And she's an English speaker, but with Arabic speaking family. And she does these incredible poems that mix language. So like this, she'll have one line in English and then the next line will be in Arabic.
Oh, that's very
poems
cool.
work in this very sort of mobile way, where you can just read the English if you want, if that's all you can understand, or you can just read the Arabic, or you can muse them together and they can mix together. And it's actually a really interesting way of talking about the way that we communicate, and our I guess our difficulties of communication.
That's a great idea. I think that it's very much about kind of experimenting with two styles of music. Like if you were to bring jazz and classical together or something like that, it's like two harmonies that might be very different. So I think that's great. I would love to try that.
Especially for our sort of point in history. I mean, we're so full of criticisms, I feel, of the way that our modern society works. But I just don't think there's ever been a time in human history where so many people have been able to access so many cultures and languages that are not their own, and that are encountering other cultures and other languages. So I think there's real room for having poetry that has different languages in, or uses words from other languages in the script of those other languages, just to remind people of how global and connected we are, So yeah, I think that might be.
That's a very hopeful message. I think we should absolutely embrace that. There's some ventures that I'm sure you know about where there's been collaboration between musicians from different cultures that might be at war, and actually a lot of that is breaking down now, which is a great shame. And I think through language, which is hopefully going to outlast all these conflicts, you could maybe capture some of that. That is a fantastic endeavor. I'd like to be part of it.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Train to somewhere. What if you were somebody different? What if the road had been curved to a different location? What if we had traveled it both? If only a moment of transference instead of the spiral to rage. Perhaps then we'd be somewhere different. The place of arrival would change. Our train at the platform has split. One side has two blinking lights. The new destination will glimmer, but the other split carriage is dark. The creak of the wheels and the movement of going somewhere yet unknown, and the view from the windows familiar. I think it's the train to call home. I want to look back at the carriage, what's left of the unity that until recently traveled together, but alas is no longer intact. We speed up into the sunshine. The passengers here are all ghosts. They look at their phones or at windows, and I'm left in this space on my own. The pathway is a straight line to somewhere. At some point I ought to get off, and call it arrival, and call it deliverance. Breathe out a sigh and let go.
I think it's incredibly revealing that your first line is, what if you were somebody different? Rather than we were somebody different. It sets the tone.
What does this reveal? I would like to know.
The rest is all about we, and then it comes on to I. But actually, I think it's great like that. It's really great.
What does it reveal? Could you make sense of it for me? Just comes out as music.
No, I was just thinking that, actually you're probably quite happy with yourself. It's just he's the problem. Ultimately. What if you were someone else? No, it's gorgeous. It's really nice. So when you write poems, I think it's really hard to put your finger on always why people write poems, but it would be really nice if you could tell us what drives you to write poems, because you're a very busy woman. You've got 2 children, you've got a full-time job, you're, rushing around being creative in other ways. What is it that poetry and writing your own poetry gives to you? Because I think what you'll say will really resonate with many people,
For me, poetry, it really is like a music. I suddenly get a moment where it comes in. It just like a rhythm of words comes in all on its own. And it is very much about capturing a feeling in the moment. And it just takes off. And I literally, with this one, it was on a train that it came. Actually, I was coming off the train, and the first 2 lines came to me. And I just had to stop in the middle of the platform and write them down and start kind of, and I went as far as I could, just like scribbling on this platform. And then later I sat down and I kind of started following it, and I found the rhythm of it, and then it just flowed out from that. I just wrote it, very quickly, and then, just made sure that it worked. It reminds me of how songwriters come, like when you listen to Paul McCartney talk about how he came up with Yesterday. It was just like, he was playing on the piano, something came to him, and then it morphed into this other thing. And for me, poetry is very much about that. But, I'm not someone who, I don't know, psychoanalyzes everything to death. There are some parts of your being, some emotions you have, and some reactions to the world that just need to come out like this. They don't come out in a way that necessarily is logical or makes sense, but it hopefully helps you process some of the things that are happening around you.
Yeah.
And both of these are poems about love, but they're also poems about kind of reacting to the world that is very confusing. And frankly, at a time when we can't really get much clarity, the world is changing fast. I think one of the things that we really can do is slow down and absorb through ourselves whatever beauty we can in the world against that darkness and confusion. And I think that's what poetry is for me.
Yeah. And that's really wonderful. And when you share your poetry, it's incredibly reassuring to other people, because your description, for instance, of everyone being a ghost on the train, and how there's nowhere more private than the street, actually. Strangely, because no one is involved with anyone else unless you force yourself on somebody's consciousness. And so many people feel like that. I think it's really lovely that other people go, oh, I'm not the only one who feels like that. I'm not the only one who experiences like that. And that experience of slowing down, as you say, slowing down and just noticing, I think it's really, really powerful and really fruitful for us all to do that in some way, whether it's writing a poem or tending a garden or baking a cake or just something where you're putting yourself out into the world in a slightly different way to the normal things you have to do. I think it's great. Albina, thank you so much for coming to talk to us. It's been so interesting, and I wish you the very best of luck with your poetry in the future.
Thank you, Helen. It's been a pleasure to come on.
If you're a regular listener and are enjoying the podcast, it would mean the world to me if you could hit the follow button on your podcast app. And if you have a moment, leave a review and a 5-star rating. Remember, you can find the poems that feature in each episode on my website, helenwing.com. If you'd like to support the production costs of our Elixir Poetry podcast, please feel free to buy me a coffee. Thanks for listening.